The great chamber of the Galactic Council had witnessed 10,000 years of history, but it had never seen anything quite like what happened on that ordinary morning. Ambassador Daniel walked through the massive doors carrying a single folder under his arm, his footsteps echoing against the polished stone floor that stretched out before him like a frozen sea. 217 species watched from their elevated seats as the human made his way to the smallest podium in the room, the one positioned at the far edge where the lighting was and the translator systems barely reached. Daniel had made this walk countless times over his 15 years of service. He knew every crack in the floor, every shadow cast by the towering columns, every dismissive glance from the beings who considered humanity barely worth acknowledging. Today would be his last time making this journey, and he found himself noticing details he had long stopped seeing. The way the Dominion representatives clustered together in their section, their compound eyes tracking his movement with barely concealed contempt. The empty seats where humanity's few allies had once sat before political pressure forced them to distance themselves. The High Arbiter's crystalline form catching the light from the artificial sun that hung suspended above the chamber. High Arbiter was ancient beyond human comprehension, his body a lattice of living crystal that had witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations. He regarded Daniel with the patient curiosity of a being who had seen everything at least twice. When Daniel reached the podium and placed his credentials upon it, leaned forward slightly, the first sign of genuine interest he had shown toward a human in decades. Lieutenant Commander Cole stood at attention near the chamber doors. She had served as Daniel's aide for 5 years, long enough to recognize the slight tremor in his hands as he opened his folder. Not fear, she knew. Exhaustion. The kind of bone-deep weariness that came from fighting battles that could never be won. Daniel cleared his throat, and the translator systems hummed to life, carrying his words to every corner of the vast room. The United Earth Federation formally withdraws from the Galactic Council, he said, his voice steady despite everything. Effective immediately and without conditions. The silence that followed was absolute. For perhaps 3 heartbeats, nothing moved, nothing breathed, nothing stirred. Then the chamber erupted into chaos. Representatives shouted over each other in a dozen different languages, their translators struggling to keep pace. Some demanded explanations. Others laughed, dismissing the announcement as a human attempt at negotiation. A few simply stared, trying to process what they had just heard. Raised one crystalline limb, and the chamber fell silent. Ambassador, he said, his voice resonating through the stone itself, this is highly irregular. Withdrawal from the council requires 6 months' notice and formal arbitration of any outstanding disputes. Daniel smiled, and there was something sad in that expression. With respect, High Arbiter, those requirements apply to member species in good standing. Humanity has never been granted good standing status despite 40 years of applications. We remain provisional members, and provisional members may withdraw at any time. The legal technicality hung in the air like smoke. Knew the human was correct. The Council had deliberately kept humanity in provisional status to limit their voting rights and access to shared resources. It had seemed like a clever bit of political maneuvering at the time. Now that cleverness had backfired in a way no one had anticipated. Surely we can discuss this, offered. If humanity has grievances, the Council is prepared to listen. Watched Daniel's shoulders tighten. She knew what he was thinking, knew the decades of frustration that boiled beneath his calm exterior. Humanity had submitted over 4,000 formal complaints through proper channels, trade restrictions that strangled their economy, technology embargoes that forced them to reinvent solutions that other species took for granted, seats on scientific committees because humans were too young as a species to contribute meaningfully. Emergency response positions refused because humans were too fragile to be trusted with important work. Every complaint had been reviewed according to protocol and dismissed without investigation. We have been trying to discuss our grievances for 40 years, Daniel said. 4,000 complaints filed and 4,000 complaints rejected. We asked for fairness and received excuses. We asked for opportunity and received barriers. We asked to be heard and received silence. He gathered his folder and tucked it back under his arm. We are not leaving in anger, High Arbiter. We are leaving because we finally understand that nothing we do will ever be enough for this council. We could cure death itself, and you would find a reason to dismiss it as primitive human tinkering. Counselor Al of the Dominion made a sound that the translators rendered as contemptuous amusement. Good riddance, he said loud enough for everyone to hear. One less backward species cluttering the chamber with their complaints. Daniel turned to look at Al, and something in his expression made the alien's compound eyes widen slightly. You know what I find interesting, Counselor? In 40 years, humanity has never once responded to your insults, never once demanded satisfaction or threatened retaliation. You took that as proof of our weakness. He paused, letting the moment stretch. Perhaps it was something else entirely. He walked toward the doors where waited. The chamber had gone quiet again, but this was a different kind of silence. Some of the representatives were beginning to look uncomfortable, as if they had just realized something important without quite understanding what it was. Ambassador called out, "What message shall I convey to the Council regarding humanity's future intentions?" Daniel stopped at the threshold and looked back one final time. "Tell them we wish them well," he said. "Tell them we hope they find everything they are looking for. Tell them that perhaps, in time, they will understand what they have lost today. And tell them that we will be watching from the darkness between the stars, building our own future with our own hands, needing nothing from beings who never wanted us here in the first place." The doors closed behind him with a soft hum that seemed to echo through the entire chamber. Fell into step beside him as they walked through the corridors toward the transport bay where their ship waited. "How long do you think before they notice?" she asked quietly. "Notice what?" "Everything we did for them, everything we built, everything we maintained because no one else would." Daniel smiled again, but this time there was no sadness in it. "By the time they understand, we will be long gone. And by the time they come looking for us, we will be strong enough that they can never dismiss us again." The human ship lifted off from the council station without ceremony. No one came to see them leave. No messages of farewell arrived. Within hours, the withdrawal was already fading from conversation, replaced by more pressing matters that the great species of the galaxy considered worthy of their attention. They did not notice that every human ship in council space had already begun its quiet journey home. They did not realize that relay stations were going dark, that emergency beacons were falling silent, that 1,000 small services humanity had provided without recognition were disappearing one by one. The galaxy did not notice the silence at first, but it would. 6 months had passed since humanity walked out of the Galactic Council, and Captain Mitchell was beginning to think the whole thing had been a mistake. Not the withdrawal itself, but the timing. She stood on the observation deck of the cargo freighter Wandering Star and watched the endless darkness of deep space stretch out before her, knowing that somewhere out there, the galaxy was starting to fall apart. The distress call had come through an hour ago from a merchant vessel stranded in the outer reach. Their navigation systems had failed after they dropped out of hyperspace, expecting to find a relay beacon that no longer existed. Humans had built that beacon 40 years ago and maintained it ever since, asking nothing in return except acknowledgement of their contribution. The Council had refused even that simple courtesy, so the beacon was now dark, and they were drifting helplessly toward an asteroid field that would tear their ship apart within days. Had picked up the distress call by accident. The Wandering Star was supposed to be heading home to Earth, but engine troubles had forced them to take a longer route through neutral space. Now she faced a choice that should have been simple but felt impossibly complicated. "We could reach them in 18 hours, her first officer said. His name was Christopher Wade, and he had served with for 7 years across 3 different ships. They could be dead in 12. Asteroids are moving faster than their initial scans suggested. Nodded slowly. She knew what the right thing to do was. She also knew that they had been among the loudest voices calling for humanity's expulsion from the Council long before they actually left. Their representative had once compared humans to a disease that needed to be quarantined before it spread. "Get me a channel to their captain," she said. The captain's face appeared on the moments later. His species had evolved from aquatic predators, and his features were sharp and angular, designed for hunting in dark waters. When he saw human faces looking back at him, his expression shifted through confusion, recognition, and finally something that might have been shame. "Human vessel," he said carefully. "We were not aware any of your kind remained in Council space." "We are passing through on our way home," replied. "I received your distress call." The captain was silent for a long moment. "I see," he said finally, "and you contacted us to inform us that you will not be rendering assistance. I understand. Given the history between our peoples, I would not expect otherwise." Felt Christopher's eyes on her. She felt the weight of every insult, every rejection, every time a representative had voted against humanity's interests in the council chamber. She thought about the beacon that her own grandfather had helped build, the one that could have guided this ship to safety if anyone had bothered to say thank you even once in 4 decades. "Actually," she said, "I contacted you to let you know we are changing course to intercept. My engineer believes she can stabilize your navigation systems long enough for you to reach the nearest station." The captain stared at her. "Why would you do this?" "Because you need help and we are able to provide it." Shrugged. "It is not more complicated than that." 18 hours later, the wandering star pulled alongside the crippled vessel. Chief Engineer spent 6 hours in an environment suit, working in conditions that would have killed most species, jury-rigging repairs that Council engineers had declared impossible. When she finally returned to the wandering star, exhausted and trembling from cold, the ship was moving under its own power again. The captain requested a direct channel before they parted ways. "I must ask," he said, "do all humans respond to distress calls from those who have wronged them?" Considered the question. "No," she admitted. "Some of us are angrier than others. Some of us remember every insult and want nothing to do with any of you. But most of us were raised to believe that when someone needs help, you help them. It does not matter if they like you. It does not matter if they would do the same for you. What matters is that you had the power to ease suffering and you chose to use it." The captain bowed his head. "I voted against your species many times in the council chamber. I believed the things I said about humanity. I was wrong." "You might have been right," said. "We are not perfect. We have done terrible things to each other throughout our history, but we try to be better than we were yesterday. That is all anyone can do." The two ships parted ways, and the wandering star continued its journey home. Word of the rescue spread through the merchant fleet, then to other species, then to the council itself. It was a small story, barely worth mentioning among the great affairs of galactic civilization, but it planted a seed of doubt in minds that had been certain of humanity's worthlessness. Meanwhile, the problems were multiplying. The agricultural world had lost 3 harvests in a row without human consultants to manage their soil reclamation programs. The hegemony had suffered 2 major industrial accidents because the human safety inspectors who used to catch potential failures were no longer there. A dozen medical research stations had run out of specialized compounds that only human cargo pilots were willing to transport. High Arbiter reviewed the reports in his private chamber and felt something he had not experienced in centuries: unease. The humans had been so quiet during their membership, so unassuming, so willing to take the jobs no one else wanted. He had assumed this made them weak and desperate. Now he was beginning to wonder if it had been something else entirely. Counselor Al requested a private audience and was granted entry. The Dominion representative looked diminished somehow, his compound eyes lacking their usual aggressive gleam. I have been studying the records, Al said. The work humans did during their membership, the positions they held, the services they provided. And what have you learned? Asked. They were everywhere, in every sector, on every station, in every system that has reported problems since their departure. They were the ones who maintained the equipment no one else wanted to touch. They were the ones who responded to emergencies in the most dangerous regions of space. They were the ones who built the infrastructure we all relied upon without ever thinking about who kept it functioning. Al made a gesture of helpless frustration. We called them primitive and backward and worthless, and the whole time they were holding the galaxy together with their bare hands. Turned to look out the window of his chamber at the stars beyond. What do you recommend? We must bring them back. Whatever it takes, whatever concessions we must offer, we cannot continue without them. And if they refuse? Al had no answer. That possibility had not occurred to him until this moment, and now that it had, he found it terrifying. The galaxy had grown accustomed to human help, human patience, human willingness to serve without recognition or reward. What happened when that willingness finally ran out? On Earth, the last of the returning ships touched down at spaceports around the world. Families reunited after years of separation. Workers who had spent decades on distant stations finally walked under their own sun again. And in quiet rooms in government buildings, plans were being made for a future that no longer included the Galactic Council. They would come looking eventually. Everyone knew that. The question was what humanity would say when they arrived. 2 years after humanity's withdrawal, the galaxy was learning a painful lesson about the difference between being useful and being valued. The lesson came in the form of cascading failures, desperate communications, and a growing sense of panic among species that had spent centuries believing themselves superior to everyone around them. Dr. Samuel Cooper had once been the head of infectious disease response for the Council's medical division. He had spent 23 years traveling to outbreak zones across 4 sectors, containing plagues that would have killed billions if left unchecked. The Council had never promoted him, never recognized his contributions, never even bothered to learn his name. He was simply the human doctor they called when things got bad, and they expected him to fix everything without asking for anything in return. Now he sat in his garden on Earth, watching his play in the afternoon sun, and he tried very hard not to think about the reports coming from Prime. A new disease had emerged there, something that attacked the respiratory systems of the native population with terrifying efficiency. They had no one trained in outbreak response. Their medical systems were designed for minor illnesses and routine procedures, not existential threats that could kill millions in weeks. Your former colleagues are asking for you, his daughter said, joining him in the garden. She worked for the Earth government now, processing the endless stream of messages that arrived from Council space begging for human assistance. They say you are the only one who has dealt with anything like this before. Samuel watched his grandson chase a butterfly across the lawn. I spent 23 years dealing with things like this. I wrote dozens of reports recommending training programs for local medical personnel. Every single one was rejected. I know. Do you know why they were rejected? Because training to handle their own emergencies would have made humanity less necessary. The Council preferred to keep us in the role of emergency servants, always available, never valued, easily dismissed when we were not needed. He shook his head slowly. I am sorry for the who will die. I truly am, but I cannot save them anymore. I do not have the resources, the support, or the authority, and even if I did, what would happen next time? They would learn nothing, change nothing, and expect humans to rescue them again whenever trouble appeared. His daughter sat down beside him. The Council is offering concessions. They want to negotiate your return to service. What kind of concessions? Full recognition of your contributions, a leadership position in the medical division, voting rights on policy decisions. Samuel laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. They are offering me the things I should have had from the beginning. The things I earned 100 times over through years of dedicated service, and they are offering them now only because they need something from me." He turned to look at his daughter directly. "What happens when the crisis passes, when they no longer need human doctors to save them from their own negligence? Do you think they will honor those concessions, or will they find reasons to revoke them one by one?" She had no answer because they both knew the truth. The council did not change. It adapted to immediate pressures and then returned to its default state as soon as those pressures eased. Humanity had seen this pattern repeat too many times to trust promises made in desperation. Across the galaxy, similar conversations were happening in homes and offices and government buildings. Human engineers were being begged to return to stations they had maintained for decades. Human pilots were being offered fortunes to resume their cargo routes through dangerous space. Human teachers, scientists, administrators, and workers of every kind were receiving messages that ranged from polite requests to barely concealed threats. Most of them said no, not out of cruelty or revenge, but out of simple self-preservation. They had given everything they had to a galaxy that treated them with contempt, and they had nothing left to give. High Arbiter convened an emergency session of the Council to address the growing crisis. The Great Chamber was less grand than it had been 2 years ago. Several representatives had stopped attending, their governments too consumed by internal problems to spare attention for galactic politics. The lights seemed dimmer, the acoustics less crisp, the whole place feeling somehow smaller and shabbier. "We are facing systemic failure across multiple sectors," announced. "The humans are not coming back, and we must find alternative solutions to the problems their departure has created." Counselor Al rose to speak. "I have been coordinating with the affected systems. The consensus is that we cannot replicate what the humans did, not quickly enough to prevent catastrophic losses." "Explain." Al made a gesture of weary resignation. "Consider the relay beacons alone. Humans built and maintained over 6,000 of them across Council space. These beacons require constant monitoring and regular maintenance in environments that most species cannot survive. We have identified perhaps 300 individuals among all Council members who possess the necessary skills and willingness to perform this work. At current rates, we can restore approximately 2% of the beacon network within the next decade." The chamber erupted in alarmed conversation. 2% was nothing. The beacon network was the nervous system of galactic civilization, carrying communications and navigation data across impossible distances. Without it, trade collapsed, emergency services became impossible, and worlds that depended on imported goods began to starve. "Why can we not train more personnel?" someone demanded. "Because no one wants to do the work," Al replied simply. "It is dangerous, lonely, and unglamorous. Humans did it because they were desperate for any opportunity to prove their worth. We have no such desperation. Our citizens expect comfortable positions with proper recognition. They will not volunteer for decades of isolation maintaining equipment in the void between stars." The truth settled over the chamber like a shroud. The Council had built a civilization that depended on human labor, while simultaneously ensuring that humans received none of the rewards of that civilization. It was exploitation so complete that most Council members had not even recognized it as such. The humans had simply been there, doing what needed to be done, asking for so little that it was easy to give them nothing at all. On Earth, Director reviewed the latest intelligence reports from Council space. She had once worked as an agricultural consultant, helping worlds feed their populations using techniques that humanity had developed over of farming their own planet. Now, she led a department tasked with monitoring the galactic situation and advising Earth's government on how to respond. "They are starting to understand," her assistant said. A young man named Peter who had grown up on a space station that no longer existed, torn apart by the for scrap metal after the humans who lived there were expelled. The Council members, I mean. Some of them are actually starting to see what they did to us. Nodded, understanding is the first step, but it is a long way from understanding to change. Do you think they will change? He considered the question carefully. Some of them might. The younger generations, the ones who were not part of building the systems that oppressed us, they might look at what their elders did and decide to be different. She paused, watching the data streams flow across her display. But the ones in power now, the in-al types who spent centuries treating us like servants, no. They will make whatever promises they need to make to get what they want, and then they will go back to exactly what they were doing before. So what do? We wait, we build. We become so strong that when they finally come to us with their apologies and their offers, we can negotiate from a position of power instead of desperation. Turn to face her assistant directly. And we never forget what they taught us about the cost of being kind to those who see kindness as weakness. Earth was changing rapidly. Technologies that humanity had developed in secret during their council membership were now being deployed openly. Cities were being rebuilt according to human principles of sustainability and beauty. Children were being educated in schools that taught them to value their heritage and trust their instincts. A new culture was emerging, one that remembered the past but refused to be defined by it. The galaxy had dismissed humanity as primitive and backward. Now humanity was building something new, something that belonged entirely to them. And when the council finally came calling, they would find a species that no longer needed their approval. 5 years after the withdrawal, a delegation from the Galactic Council finally arrived in Earth's solar system. Their ship was magnificent, a crystalline vessel that caught the light of humanity's sun and scattered it into 1,000 rainbow fragments. Inside that ship, 20 representatives from the most powerful species in the galaxy sat in uncomfortable silence, rehearsing apologies they had never expected to give. High Arbiter led the delegation personally. It was unprecedented for the leader of the council to travel anywhere, let alone to a world that had been dismissed as primitive for generations. But these were unprecedented times, and had finally understood that the usual approaches would not work with humanity. Counselor Al sat beside him, his compound eyes dimmed with age and something that might have been regret. He had spent the past 5 years studying human history, human culture, human philosophy. What he found there had shattered everything he thought he knew about the galaxy and his place in it. "They are so young," he murmured as their ship approached Earth. "As a species, I mean. They have existed for barely a moment compared to the rest of us, and yet they built all of this." Earth hung before them like a jewel against the darkness. The planet had been transformed during humanity's isolation. Orbital stations circled the world in elegant patterns, their designs incorporating principles that council engineers had never considered. Ships moved through the system with quiet confidence, their drives producing none of the wasteful radiation that marked council technology. Everything was clean and purposeful and beautiful in ways that made the counselors feel strangely inadequate. "We made a terrible mistake," said quietly. "We had something precious in our hands and we threw it away because we could not see its value." The human escort that met them was professional but distant. Lieutenant Commander Rachel guided their shuttle to a landing pad on the surface, providing information about atmospheric conditions and local customs without any warmth or familiarity. She was young, born after humanity's withdrawal, and she had grown up in a world that viewed the Council as a cautionary tale rather than an authority to be respected. "Welcome to Earth," she said as the delegation disembarked. "The Federation Council is expecting you." The Federation Council met in a building that would have seemed modest by galactic standards, but every detail of its construction spoke of careful thought and intentional design. Natural light filled the chambers through windows that adjusted automatically to the movement of the sun. Plants grew in integrated systems that cleaned the air and provided food for the workers. Everything served multiple purposes, nothing was wasted, and the overall effect was one of harmony rather than dominance. Ambassador Blake greeted the delegation at the entrance to the main chamber. He was a tall man with kind eyes and gray at his temples, and he carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had nothing to prove. "The Federation has received your request for a formal audience," he said. "We are prepared to hear what the Council has to say." The meeting room was simple. A long table, comfortable chairs, windows overlooking a garden where humans of all ages were working together on some kind of community project. The Council delegation sat on one side, the human representatives on the other, and for a long moment no one spoke. Finally broke the silence. "We have come to apologize," he said, "not merely for the sake of politics or negotiation, but because we have finally understood the magnitude of what we did to your species. The Council treated humanity with contempt for 40 years. You opportunities, dismissed your contributions, and convinced ourselves that you were beneath our notice. We were wrong." The words hung in the air. Several of the human representatives exchanged glances, but their expressions remained neutral. "We have prepared a formal document," Al added, sliding a data tablet across the table. "It contains a complete acknowledgement of every grievance humanity submitted during your membership, every complaint that was dismissed without investigation, every opportunity that was without justification. We are not asking you to accept our apologies. We are simply telling you that we finally see what we did." Ambassador Blake picked up the tablet and scrolled through its contents. The room remained silent as he read. Finally, he set it down and looked at the delegation with an expression that was difficult to interpret. "This is comprehensive," he acknowledged, "more honest than we expected." "We have had 5 years to reflect on our failures," said. 5 years of watching systems collapse because the humans who maintained them were gone. 5 years of realizing how much we depended on beings we refused to respect." He paused, his crystalline form dimming slightly. "We are not here to demand your return to the Council. We understand that such trust, once broken, cannot easily be restored. We are here to ask what humanity requires from us and to commit ourselves to providing it." Director spoke for the first time. The older woman had been listening with her arms folded, her expression thoughtful. "You want to know what we require?" she asked. "It is simple. We require nothing from you." The delegation seemed confused by this response. "Nothing," Al repeated. "Nothing," leaned forward slightly. "You see, we spent 40 years trying to earn your respect. We gave everything we had, asked for almost nothing in return, and were treated like servants at best and vermin at worst. During that time, we learned something important about ourselves. Our value does not depend on your recognition of it. We know who we are. We know what we can do. And we have built a civilization that thrives without your approval or assistance." "Then why did you agree to this meeting?" asked. "Because we are not without hope," Ambassador Blake replied. "We believe that change is possible, even for beings as old and set in their ways as the Council. We believe that the younger generations among your species might choose differently than their elders. And we believe that the galaxy could be better if everyone learned the lessons that humanity was forced to learn." "What lessons would those be?" "That kindness is not weakness, that patience is not surrender, that the small, quiet work of maintaining civilization is just as important as the grand gestures that fill history books." Blake spread his hands on the table before him. "You want humanity back in the Council because you need us to do the jobs no one else wants to do. But what you should want is a Council where everyone shares those burdens equally, where no species is designated as servants while others take the rewards." Al bowed his head. "You are asking us to change everything about how we operate." "We are asking you to become what you always claimed to be," said. "A true partnership of equals, working together for mutual benefit. Not a hierarchy where some species dominate and others serve." The negotiation continued for 3 days. The Council delegation offered concessions that would have seemed unimaginable 5 years earlier. Full voting rights, leadership positions, technology sharing, formal recognition of all human contributions throughout history. The human representatives listened to each offer, and responded with the same quiet patience that had characterized their species throughout their dealings with the galaxy. In the end, they reached no agreement. Humanity did not rejoin the Council, but something else happened, something perhaps more important. A framework was established for ongoing communication. A set of principles was drafted that could guide future relations. And for the first time, the beings of the Galactic Council truly saw humanity not as useful servants or inconvenient pests, but as equals worthy of respect. As the delegation prepared to depart, Counselor Al approached Ambassador Blake privately. "I must ask you something that has troubled me since we arrived," he said. "During all those years when we treated your people so badly, why did you never fight back? You had the capabilities. We know that now. You could have made us pay for every insult, every rejection, every injustice, but you simply endured and continued helping us anyway." Blake considered the question for a long moment. "Because revenge would have proven you right about us," he said finally. "You believed we were primitive and violent, driven by emotion rather than reason. Fighting back would have confirmed those beliefs. Instead, we chose to be better than you expected. We chose to help even when it hurt, to give even when nothing was given in return. And in the end, that choice is what brought you here today, willing to apologize, willing to change." Al's compound eyes glistened with something that might have been tears. "I wish I had understood this 40 years ago." "So do we," Blake replied, "but we cannot change the past. We can only choose what comes next." 10 years after humanity walked out of the Galactic Council, a new species arrived at the Great Chamber seeking membership. They called themselves and they were small and fragile and desperate for a place among the stars. There was dying, poisoned by industrial accidents that their primitive technology could not clean. They had barely managed to develop space travel in time to seek help from the wider galaxy, and now they stood before the Council as humanity had once stood, hopping for acceptance, fearing rejection. High Arbiter watched them approach the podium that had once belonged to human ambassadors. The representative was trembling, her 4 delicate arms wrapped around herself in a gesture of anxiety that needed no translation. She was young by any measure, the leader of her people not because she was qualified, but because no one else had been willing to face the Council's judgment. "I am first speaker of the collective," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We come seeking membership in the Galactic Council. We know that we have little to offer. Our technology is primitive. Our resources are limited. Our world is damaged beyond repair. But we are willing to work. We are willing to learn. We are willing to do whatever is necessary to earn a place among you." The chamber fell silent. Every representative present was thinking the same thing, remembering a different species that had stood in this exact spot decades ago, offering the same humble willingness to serve. Counselor Al rose from his seat. He was ancient now, his compound eyes nearly clouded over, but his voice remained strong. "First speaker," he said, "please approach the center of the chamber." The representative did as she was told, confusion evident in her posture. Al descended from his elevated position and walked to meet her on the floor, something that had never happened in all the Council's history. "Many years ago," Al said, "another species stood where you stand now. They were small and fragile and desperate, just as you are. They came to us seeking acceptance, and we gave them contempt instead. We took advantage of their willingness to work, assigned them the most dangerous and thankless tasks, and refused to recognize their contributions even when those contributions held the galaxy together." He bowed his head. "We were wrong. And we have spent the last decade trying to become worthy of the second chance they may someday give us." Stared at him in confusion. "I do not understand." "The species I speak of was called humanity. They left the Council 10 years ago because we failed them completely. Since their departure, we have been forced to confront everything we did wrong, and we have made changes. Slow changes, difficult changes, changes that many of us resisted until we had no choice but to accept them." He raised his head and looked directly at her. "They will not receive the same treatment humanity received." You will be granted full membership with complete voting rights immediately. You will be assigned work that matches your capabilities, not work that other species consider beneath them. You will be heard when you speak, and your complaints will be investigated when you file them. The chamber erupted in surprised conversation. This was not how the council operated. New species were supposed to prove themselves over generations before receiving full privileges. The established order was supposed to be maintained. But rose and raised one crystalline limb, silencing the chamber. Counselor Al speaks for the Reformed Council, he said. We made a promise to humanity that we would treat the next species better than we treated them. This is that promise being kept. Looked around the chamber in wonder. Why? She asked. Why would you change your ways for beings you have never met? Because someone showed us what we should have been all along, Al replied. And even though we cannot undo what we did to them, we can honor their example by doing better now. On Earth, Ambassador Blake watched a recording of the council session in his office. He was older now, his hair entirely gray, his face lined with the years of patient diplomacy that had followed the initial delegation's visit. Beside him sat Director, equally aged but still sharp as ever. They actually did it, she said quietly. They kept their word. They did, smiled for what felt like the first time in months. Maybe there is hope for them after all. A message had arrived along with the recording, addressed to the United Earth Federation from High Arbiter personally. It was short and simple. We have begun the work you asked of us. We are becoming what we should have been. When you are ready to return, we will be honored to welcome you as equals. Pass the message too. What do you think? She read it carefully, then set it down on his desk. I think we should wait and see how they treat thee over the next decade. Words are easy. Sustained action is hard. She paused, looking out the window at the thriving city beyond. But I also think we should start preparing for the possibility that they might actually change. That someday we might go back. And if we do go back, then we go back as partners, not as servants. We go back because we choose to, not because we need to. And we go back knowing that we earned our place through generations of sacrifice and patience, and refusing to become what they expected us to be. The sun was setting over the city, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold that reminded of the lights on the old council station, where he had first served as a junior diplomat. So much had changed since those days. Humanity had grown from a desperate supplicant into a confident civilization that no longer needed external validation. They had proven that kindness was not weakness, that patience was not surrender, that sometimes the most powerful thing you could do was simply walk away and build something better. In the garden below his office, children were playing a game that involved running and laughing and pretending to be explorers among the stars. They were the first generation to grow up in a world where humanity answered to no one but themselves. They did not carry the scars of their grandparents' struggles. They did not remember what it felt like to be dismissed and ignored and treated as less than nothing. But they had been taught. Every school on Earth included lessons about the council years, about the 40 years of service and the walking away and the long rebuilding that followed. The children learned that their ancestors had chosen dignity over accommodation, self-respect over acceptance, a difficult freedom over a comfortable servitude, and they learned that this choice had made all the difference. Turned away from the window and began drafting a response too. He chose his words carefully, knowing that they would be recorded in the archives of both civilizations, knowing that future generations would look back on this moment as either the beginning of a new era or another false start in a long history of disappointment. The United Earth Federation acknowledges the Council's efforts toward reform, he wrote. We have observed your treatment of thee and we are cautiously encouraged. We remain open to renewed relations when the time is right and when sustained action has demonstrated genuine change. Until then, we wish you well in your continued development. He signed the message and sent it before he could second-guess himself. Then he stood and walked to the window one more time, watching the stars appear in the darkening sky. Somewhere out there, the galaxy was slowly learning what humanity had always known, that the small things matter, that the quiet workers who keep everything running deserve respect, that the measure of a civilization is not its power or its technology, but how it treats the beings who ask nothing but to be treated fairly. It had taken walking away for the Council to understand this. It had taken 10 years of struggling without human help, 10 years of watching systems fail and worlds suffer, 10 years of confronting the consequences of their own arrogance. But they were learning. Slowly, imperfectly, with many setbacks and much resistance, they were becoming something better than what they had been. And humanity was watching, waiting, building, growing stronger with every passing year. Someday they would return to the stars as equals. Someday the galaxy would welcome them not as servants but as partners. Someday the promise that had brought them to the Council in the first place would finally be fulfilled. But until that day came, they would remain exactly where they were, patient, proud, and at peace with who they had chosen to become.